sarve bhavantu sukhinah, sarve santu niramayaha, sarve bhadrani pashyantu, ma kaschid dukkha bhag bhavet, sarve sadbhavam apnotu. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Hari Om Tat Sat. May all be happy. May no one suffer from diseases. May all see only goodness in others. May all have right thinking. And may there be peace, peace and peace everywhere by God's grace. This is an ancient prayer of our scriptures. Yes, we need a peaceful environment to think of divinity. Okay. The subject of my talk is Vivekananda, the messenger of Sri Ramakrishna. I'll talk a little bit about who was this Vivekananda. Because just last Thursday he observed a worship in honor of Swami Vivekananda, because that's when he was born. In India, birthdays of ordinary people are not observed. Only the birthdays of saints are observed. Nowadays things may have changed, but when we were growing up at that time, that's how it was in India. We used to observe the birthdays of saints and divine incarnations. And Hinduism, which is the most ancient living faith of the world, has voluminous religious scriptures. And in this religion, the word blasphemy is not used, as I have said many times in the past. Any sincere question can be asked. That's why all the sincere questions are there, and their answers also have been given by this religion, which the British gave the name Hinduism. Our ancestors would call it the perennial religion or Sanatana Dharma. This religion has produced many saints, and its scriptures give answers to most of our spiritual questions. There is a book called the Bhagavad Gita. It is part of a great epic of Hinduism. That epic is called the Mahabharata. That Mahabharata has a part which is called the Bhagavad Gita, the Song of God. Many teachings of God are contained in that book. Truly speaking, the Bhagavad Gita is the essence of all the major scriptures of Hinduism or Sanatana Dharma. Gita Sugita Kartavya Kivannai Shastra Bistroi. Let one sing or study the Bhagavad Gita properly. If one does that, then what is the use of studying other scriptures? That's what it is said. And this Bhagavad Gita says something very interesting. Yada yada hi dharmasya glanir-bhavati bharata abhyutthanam adharmasya tatatmanam srijamyaham. There, God is speaking through a divine incarnation. That divine incarnation is Krishna. And saying, whenever there is decline of spirituality, then God bodies himself forth, takes on a body. Why? That body comes to this level of our existence and then teaches us how to get out of our bondage and get to know our divinity. That's why God incarnates, sometimes in human form. According to the need of the time, God bodies himself forth. And so in the Bhagavad Gita, that is there. That's why at different periods of time, there have been different divine incarnations. And Sri Ramakrishna happens to be one of the two latest divine incarnations. The other one is Sri Sarada Devi and Sri Ramakrishna. These two divine incarnations, they are the divine incarnations of this age. Why God incarnates? Paritranaya sadhunam vinashaya cha dushkritam. To save those who are the victims of this spiritual degradation and to destroy those who are responsible for this spiritual degradation. That is the purpose. Sri Krishna, a divine incarnation, said to Arjuna that whenever there is confusion in your mind and you don't know what you should do, then remember me. Sarva dharman parityajya mamekam sharanam braja aham toham sarva papebhyo moksheshyami ma shucha. Is in Sanskrit. That is, give up all other practices of spiritual life and just depend on me, because I am the divine incarnation. I liberate you from all that is harmful to you, which stands in the way of your experiencing divinity. Everything is divine. That is the teaching. Sarvam khalu idam brahma. Yes. And Sri Ramakrishna, the divine incarnation for this age, also came to do the same thing. Came to teach others what spiritual life is, how to experience divinity. And he mentions that he had a vision. In that vision he saw the light of divinity everywhere. And that light became condensed and took the form of a child. And as the scriptures of Sanatana Dharma teach us that there are 7 ancient sages who have experienced divinity, and they're busy thinking of divinity all the time. They're called 7 sages or Saptarshi in Sanskrit. And that divine child came to one of them and caught hold of that sage's hand and said, "Please come with me." And that child was, what was that child? That child was no other than God, who became born as Sri Ramakrishna, a divine incarnation. So Sri Ramakrishna requested that sage, and Rishi means sage, that sage to come along with him. Why? To assist in his work. And this sage, when he was reborn as a human being, was Vivekananda. And it is Vivekananda who helped in preaching the message of the divine incarnation, Ramakrishna. That's why I chose the subject of my talk today as Vivekananda, the messenger of Sri Ramakrishna. Sri Ramakrishna had to become a worshipper at the temple complex in that village Dakshineshwar in Bengal. That temple complex was founded by one famous lady called Rani Rasmani, Queen Rasmani, so to say. And it had many temples of different deities, because the Sanatana Dharma allows those deities. All deities are one and the only divinity. That is also mentioned in our scriptures. Ekam sadvipra bahudha vadanti. There is only one divinity, but different sages call the same divinity by different names. That is the teaching in the Rig Veda. So there were many temples in that temple complex in that village Dakshineshwar, which is only a few miles away from the city Calcutta. And Sri Ramakrishna, at the request of one of his cousins, so to say, or brothers, had to be the worshipper in the temple of the Divine Mother Kali in that temple complex. So he would see divinity in the form of Divine Mother Kali. He would see divinity everywhere, but especially in regard to this temple complex, he would refer to the Divine Mother Kali as his mother of divinity. And he was the child. While there, he remembered why he had come down to earth. He was a divine incarnation. He was no ordinary soul. The purpose why he had come down to earth was to establish spirituality in its full form. And he remembered that sometimes. He also remembered that vision of him coming down to earth in the form of a divine child. And he needed some messenger. That messenger was no other than one of those ancient sages. So he remembered that vision, and he would wait for that messenger to come to him. But he felt that the messenger had not yet come. So he would sometimes pray to the Divine Mother, saying, "Mother, where are they? Where is that messenger?" Then the Divine Mother said to him, "Wait, they will all come." He didn't have just one messenger, several messengers. The most important among them was born as Vivekananda. When he was born, his name was Narendra. He was born on January 12th, 1863. He lived for less than 40 years. And Sri Ramakrishna existed in his physical form also for less than 50 years. So when he prayed to the Divine Mother, Kali, "Where are they?" I saying. Then the mother said, "Yes, they will come." So one of them was Narendra. He was reborn. He was that ancient sage, one of those sages, 7 sages mentioned in our scriptures. And he was born as the son of Vishwanath Datta of Calcutta. And his name was Narendranath Datta. His mother was Bhuvaneshwari Devi. So Narendranath Datta was born on January 12th, 1863. And as Sri Ramakrishna had predicted, he lived for less than 40 years. He passed away on July 4th, 1902. So Sri Ramakrishna met his messenger Vivekananda for the first time in a devotee's home named Surendranath Mitra. He had his home in a neighborhood called Simulia in Calcutta. And Surendranath Mitra invited Narendra to come and sing some songs, devotional songs. Narendra was a very good singer also, among other things. He was a brilliant student, and so many other things, noble qualities he had. And singing was one of his qualities. So Narendra came and sang in Surendranath Mitra's home a few devotional songs. And Surendranath Mitra most probably had invited Narendra to come and do that because he had great regard for Sri Ramakrishna. Surendra had. That is the first time when Narendra saw Ramakrishna. And the second meeting between Narendra and Ramakrishna took place in December 1881. And at that time, he visited Sri Ramakrishna with Surendranath Mitra, then Ramchandra Datta, and one or two of his friends. Then the third meeting was very interesting. Narendra by that time had come to know where Ramakrishna lived. That means in Dakshineshwar temple complex. She came to see Ramakrishna all the way on foot from Calcutta. Several miles he had to walk. And then Sri Ramakrishna, when Narendra came to Sri Ramakrishna, then Sri Ramakrishna touched Narendra's body with his right foot, and at that time something strange happened to Narendra. He lost his outer consciousness. He went to a different world, so to say. And then when he regained consciousness, he said to Ramakrishna, "What have you done to me? I have my parents." Not only that, he had been told that he had to be a lawyer. I have to be a lawyer. But Ramakrishna knew better. The fourth meeting of Narendra with Ramakrishna was in a particular person's home. His name was, he was very wealthy, named Jadulal Malik. And he had his county house near the Dakshineshwar temple complex. He lived somewhere in Calcutta, the big city, but he had this county house. And Sri Ramakrishna would be welcome to visit his county house, which he visited sometimes. And once Narendra came and met Sri Ramakrishna in Jadulal Malik's county house. And there Sri Ramakrishna touched Narendra, and Narendra lost outer consciousness. At that time, Sri Ramakrishna asked Narendra many questions and came to know that Narendra would be his main messenger to preach his teachings. And Narendra was no other than one of those 7 sages reborn to help him spread his teachings of spirituality. And also, Sri Ramakrishna came to know that Narendra had 18 special powers, just one of which is enough to make a person to become well known. He had 18 great powers to influence people. And this Narendra associated with Sri Ramakrishna for long 5 years. That means 1/8 period of Narendra's life. Because Ramakrishna, when he saw Narendra, he knew that Narendra would not live beyond 40. And this prophecy came true. We shall see later. Then the last few days of his life, Sri Ramakrishna spent in a county house which had been hired by his well-wishers for him to stay. It is a county house of a rich man in that place called Kashipur, near Calcutta. Sri Ramakrishna stayed there for a while, and there he passed away. And Narendra had read about Nirvikalpa Samadhi, and he would come to see Sri Ramakrishna there more or less frequently. And then one day he requested Sri Ramakrishna to grant him the experience of that kind of samadhi which is called nirvikalpa samadhi, when only divinity remains but nothing else is there. Highest spiritual ecstasy mentioned in our scriptures. And Sri Ramakrishna would not grant his prayer immediately. Then one day he said, all right, you are insisting. And after that Narendra had that nirvikalpa samadhi. He lost his body consciousness and everything. When he regained his body consciousness and came to see Ramakrishna, Ramakrishna said to him, you had asked for it and you have experienced it. That is, you are divinity, you are not your body. But the door to this samadhi or ecstatic spiritual experience will be locked from now on. And when you will have done the Divine Mother's work, that means God's work, then this door will be opened by me. And the key will be with me, he said. And in Kashipur country house also, one day Narendra was in his room and Sri Ramakrishna touched Narendra. And Narendra felt like some electricity was entering into your body. And he lost his body consciousness. After that, Sri Ramakrishna said to Narendra, I have given you all my spiritual powers and now I am a pauper. Of course, the divine incarnation can never be a pauper. But he said that is all his spiritual powers he had given to Narendra so that Narendra could do his work as a messenger. Then Sri Ramakrishna passed away after a while. And Narendra with some of the followers of Sri Ramakrishna formed a small monastery in a place called Baranagar. At that time they would go out and at that time they had already become monks, so to say. One of them was Swami Premananda, later on he became, otherwise known as Baburam Ghosh. So in their home they went and there is a temple, and in that temple some of them were there, those close followers of Sri Ramakrishna. Then they became monks, all of them. They decided to become monks. Did the name Vivekananda come at that time? Well, perhaps not. But they all became sannyasis. And they would sometimes go out wandering. As wandering monks, they would go to different places of pilgrimage and all that. Narendra also once went. He walked all the way and all this. And at that time, he had a great desire to have that experience of Nirvikalpa Samadhi again. But Sri Ramakrishna had said to him that he would not have that Samadhi until Narendra would have done the Divine Mother's work. But still he was not satisfied. He wanted to have that experience again. He heard of a famous saint of that place in Gazipur while traveling. And he thought that he would go to him, perhaps that saint would help him to have that experience. But when he went and saw that saint, his name was Pauhari Baba, that saint could see the spiritual depth of Narendra and wanted to have spiritual help from Narendra. That was a great disappointment of Narendra. And at that time, Sri Ramakrishna appeared to him 3 or 4 times to dissuade Narendra from his resolve to become a follower of Pauhari Baba. And when Pauhari Baba wanted to get spiritual help from Narendra, then Narendra understood that he should follow Sri Ramakrishna. At that time he wrote a letter to one friend that he had, and he lived in the holy city of Benares. His name was Pramoda Das Mitra. He wrote, "From now on this fellow will not go to anyone else." That is, will stick to Ramakrishna. And Swami Vivekananda went on traveling. Was his name Vivekananda at that time? Nobody really knows. And some say that he would change his name from one place to another so that his brother monks would not be able to trace him. He wanted anonymity. So when he was in that place in India called Rajasthan, then he went to a place called Khetri. And in those days there were many native states in India. And the king of Khetri at that time could see Swami Vivekananda's spirituality and became his disciple. That was in Rajasthan. Then Swami Vivekananda traveled and went to the southernmost tip of India. And there was a state, small state called Ramanada. And the king of Ramanada was Bhaskar Setupati. And Bhaskar Setupati saw the spirituality of Vivekananda and became his disciple. And also it is mentioned that when he was at the southernmost tip of India, in a place called Kanyakumari, he felt like swimming and going to an island nearby, which he did because he was physically very fit also. He went there and went to that island and sat on that island and tried to meditate. At that time he could see the poverty of India and all that. So he thought that he should do something about that. Then he had, by that time he had heard that a parliament of religions was going to be held in America, in Chicago. That was the first parliament of all these different religious groups in the world. It was something strange. But Narendra, when he heard of that, he thought it would be a nice thing to go and attend. But he had not been invited as a delegate. He was not even known as a monk. So he had no letter of introduction, nothing. But at that time then after that he went further north, and there while he was in the city which is called Chennai today, at that time it will be called Madras. And then while he was in a coast, Madras coast, there he had a vision. He saw Sri Ramakrishna walking on water and going toward the west and beckoning Vivekananda to follow him. And to the west means it was America. So Sri Ramakrishna was beckoning Narendra to go to America, it looked like. Then there was a person who was a psychic who lived nearby. His name was Govinda Chetty. So he, with the help of some departed soul, he could tell the future of people. So some people said to Narendra that Govinda Chetty had that power. So Narendra went there. Govinda Chetty saw Narendra and said that in the future he would have to go abroad and preach some religion. And what Govinda Chetty said, that it came true later on, we shall see. And at that time, Sri Ramakrishna had beckoned through that vision, beckoned Vivekananda to go to the west. So, and some friends, such as the king of Ramnad and all, they also wanted the Vivekananda to go and attend that parliament. So eventually he and Vivekananda, at the request of mainly the king of Khetri, decided to go by ship to America. And then the king of Khetri collected some money and gave him also to make the trip. So Vivekananda went by the ship. It is very interesting that the ship, name of the ship was Empress of India. At that time it was British India. So Narendra started his voyage from Bombay, and it is believed, as far as we know, that the private secretary to the king of Khetri saw him off there at the shipyard, Bombay. Then the ship touched different places. It went to Sri Lanka, Colombo and all those places. Then it went to Hong Kong and in Japan, Yokohama and all these places that ship touched. And eventually the ship arrived in Vancouver in Canada, Vancouver, BC of British Columbia. There Vivekananda stayed in a hotel for a day or two, and then he took a train to Chicago. So he, according to the available report, Narendra arrived in Vancouver BC on July 16th, 1893. And after arriving from there, he went by train to Chicago. And going there, he heard that the parliament would start on September 11th, 1893, and would end on September 22nd. So he had arrived 2 or 3 months too early. Then he decided to go to, somebody advised him to go to Boston by train. And he had acquired a friend. He was of Indian ancestry. His name was Lalu Bhai. And so with him he went to Boston. And in that train he met Mrs. Sanborn. And that lady was so impressed by seeing Swami Vivekananda that she requested Vivekananda to stay with her in her house as a guest. And in her house, on August 24th, he met Professor John Henry Wright. John Henry Wright was a professor of Harvard University. And so Vivekananda met John Henry Wright at Mrs. Sanborn's house. And Professor Wright was very much impressed by seeing Vivekananda. And he was requested to write a letter of introduction which Swami Vivekananda needed to join the parliament. Then in that letter of introduction, the Professor Wright wrote down about Vivekananda. He is more learned than all our professors put together. Such a tribute he gave. Then to attend the parliament he arrived in Chicago. And when he, by train, and when he arrived there he discovered that he had lost the address of Dr. Barrows, who was the chairman of the General Committee of the Parliament of Religions. And in Chicago, that was the area where mostly German-speaking people were there. So he had to stay in a hotel, but he could not even talk to them. They were all speaking in German language. So anyway, so what he did was, at the railroad station there was a packing case, empty, large empty packing case, and he slept inside that packing case for the night. And in the morning, not knowing where he would go, he was walking down the street on the ocean front. Then one lady saw him. For some reason, she was very impressed by seeing this Hindu monk and invited him to stay in her house. And that lady's name was Mrs. Hale. And Mrs. Hale took Vivekananda to the parliament and introduced him there. That's how Vivekananda could become a delegate of the parliament. And then strange things started happening. When he stood up giving his speech at the parliament, then he addressed the audience as sisters and brothers of America. And hearing that, there was such a long applause that it took several minutes for that applause to stop. How could that happen? Well, I am sure it was the power of Sri Ramakrishna which had been working through Vivekananda. And then he gave the talk. It impressed the audience so much. Then a few other talks he had to give at the parliament. And about his talks, a local newspaper wrote, "He is an orator by divine right," they wrote. And due to his oratorical skill, he was hired by a lecture bureau and saying that the Bureau would pay some money to him. And Narendra at that time had that wish to start a religious organization in India named after his guru Sri Ramakrishna. But that would cost money. So he accepted that position. And so he went to different places wherever that lecture bureau took him. Sometimes he had to give 3 lectures every day. And then strange things would happen. At night, Sri Ramakrishna would appear to him and would tell him what to speak of, what should be the subject of his talk and so on. And once when he was in Detroit, some people, they had become jealous of him and invited him to a certain home. And there he was given some coffee to drink. That coffee had poison in it. And at that time Sri Ramakrishna appeared before him and said, "Don't drink that coffee, it has poison." That's why Sri Ramakrishna protected him from danger also. And at night when he would sleep, at that time Sri Ramakrishna would appear to him and would tell him what to talk about the following day. By the time the period of his working for the lecture bureau was over, he was in that place called Thousand Island Park in upstate New York. And by that time he had acquired a few admirers. And one day, while sitting under an oak tree in Thousand Island Park, he had his Nirvikalpa Samadhi. Under an oak tree in Thousand Island Park. That Thousand Island Park has become a place of pilgrimage for the Ramakrishna devotees nowadays. So anyway, he got back his Nirvikalpa Samadhi, indicating that the Divine Mother's work, which he had to do at the behest of Sri Ramakrishna, had been done. So he decided to go back to India. He went to India twice from America. After going back to India, he started the Ramakrishna mission with its headquarters in Belur Math near Calcutta. And then, as I told you, he passed away in Belur Math on July 4th, 1902. It is very interesting, that is the Independence Day of America, July 4th. Swami Vivekananda passed away on that day in Belur Math. By that time he had started the Ramakrishna order, to which fortunately I belong. About Vivekananda, the first Secretary General of the United Nations, that was formed a few years later. His name was U Thant. He was from the Republic of Burma. Now they call it Myanmar. So U Thant knew Vivekananda, about Vivekananda. And he mentioned Swami Vivekananda was the first spiritual ambassador of Asia to the West. That's what he said. And Rabindranath Tagore was the first Nobel laureate in literature in Asia. He was born in a family of a reformist Hindu group called the Brahma Samaj. His father, Devendranath Tagore, was one of the leaders of that group also. This Rabindranath Tagore, as a Nobel laureate, came to know some other Nobel Prize winners. And one of them was Rolla of France. So Rolla once wrote to Rabindranath Tagore, that is, I would like to know about India. How can I know India? Please tell me. Then Tagore wrote to Rolla, if you want to know India, read Vivekananda. In him, nothing is negative, everything is positive. This is what Rabindranath Tagore wrote to Rolla, another Nobel laureate of France. So I would also request the listeners of this morning's talk, that is, in Vivekananda there is nothing negative, everything is positive. By following him, we can experience our inherent divinity. And that's why he was brought to this world by Sri Ramakrishna. Let us follow Vivekananda. I am lucky enough to belong to a monastic order started by Vivekananda. Once in San Francisco I had to go on meditation. Then I said, Swami Vivekananda is our commander-in-chief and we are his soldiers, foot soldiers. It is because of him that we are here in this country working among the children of God. And here a day will come when the materialism which still is there in this country will disappear. And it has been said that two waves are rising in the world, spiritual waves. One is the wave of materialism rising in America. The other one is the wave of materialism rising higher and higher in India, centering Ramakrishna. These two waves will meet someday, and then a new civilization will start. Let us wait for that day. Thank you all so much for listening to this talk.